Tonight on Business Live, Fitch Solutions projects policy rate of 30% by the Bank of Ghana at its next meeting in September 2023, but hopeful real interest rates will return to positive trajectory before end of year. Also in this bulletin, energy strategist fears the country is moving towards a difficult terrain where there could be power shortages as independent power producers meet today to decide way forward on debt owed them by government.
We are not able to handle that because of, financial weaknesses from our side. We're not able to handle that, and they live up to, the threats that they previously promised, and they stay the course on that. We're going to have difficulty.
Expected shortage of onion to hit Ghana's market following coup in Niger as Ghana imports over 60% of the vegetable from that country. We shall be analyzing the implications of that on Ghana. We've got details of these and many others coming your way, all in a moment. Please stay. Thanks very much for your time. I am Pius Kojobaka. Let's now settle for the details. And Fitch Solutions says it is forecasting a steady policy rate of 30% by the Bank of Ghana as its next meeting in September 2023. It, however, believes that the central bank will commence a monetary easing cycle in the fourth quarter of 2023 as inflation will moderate rapidly towards the end of 2023. There is more in this report.
In its latest report on Ghana, the UK-based firm said the Bank of Ghana will keep the policy rate on hold at its next Monetary Policy Committee meeting in September. It believes the regulator of the banking industry will commence a monetary easing cycle in the fourth quarter of 2023, cutting the benchmark policy rate by 200 basis points to 28% by the end of the year. Fitch Solutions furthered that inflation will moderate rapidly in the fourth quarter of 2023 as a result of favorable base effects. The cedi sold off rapidly in the fourth quarter of 2023, suggesting that the currency will be significantly stronger in the last quarter of this year, sharply reducing imported pressures on a year-on-year basis. This Fitch Solutions report said it informs its forecast that inflation will fall below the 30% mark by November. It means real interest rates will return to positive territory for the first time since January 2022. As a result, it expects the central bank to adopt a more relaxed monetary policy stance at the last MPC meeting of 2023.
Senior finance lecturer at the University of Ghana Business School, Dr. Benjamin Amwa, says the marginal policy rate hike will not have a harsh economic impact on business. The Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of Ghana on Monday increased its policy rate by 50 basis points to 30% earlier this week. Meanwhile, Dr. Amwa believes the marginal increase would rather aid in the quest to control inflation. He spoke to Joy Business.
One will not expect a sudden increase in the rates that banks will charge their customers who come in for loans and facilities that are hinged on the MPC rate. So, yes, it is an increase, but it's marginal. We will not be seeing higher hikes in rate going forward. So banks can plan. It's going to be marginal. It's going to be marginal. Businesses will not necessarily increase prices because of a 50 basis point increase in policy rate. I don't think banks will quickly also increase their loan rate because of a 50 basis point increase in hikes. It will lead, but it will not be that marginal like what we're seeing, 150 basis point and 200 basis point increase. Those are quite, huge jumps, but we are not seeing it in this instance. So we expect it to be gradual. Yeah.
Now, independent power producers are meeting today to decide the way forward over debts owed them by government. Now, Joy Business is learning that the debt owed the IPPs would hit $2.2 billion by the end of this month. The unhappy IPPs have threatened to stop supplying power to the national grid because government has breached its promise to settle part of the debt. Energy strategist Dr. Yusuf Suleimana says the country is moving to address the issue.
Let's just prioritize and make sure that we put the monies where it is important, because doing so is not anything that anybody wants to go through. And we all know what doing so, what comes with doing so when it hits. And so we can't say we don't have the money. Yes, we are in difficult times, but let's kind of put up a kind of a spirited negotiation ability with respect to the IPPs. I think what is happening now, the negotiation between IPPs and the Ministry of Finance is not moving. There's a huge inertia. It's quite disturbing. So if something is not pledged, or you pledge on something and you don't meet that, it's just going to be a problem. And so going forward, holistically, we have to look at the entire chain and make sure that we enhance efficiencies within the chain. Other than that, power given to you and you aren't able to return the money back to those who will give you the power, it's just not sustainable. It cannot work that way. And so what I want to urge the government of Ghana and through Ministry of Finance, we know we are constrained. That's certainly so. But we need to have a framework, a plan, a clear-cut plan in place, where we have to dedicate some amount of money to be able to take care of power that is given out. We can, it's not negotiable. Because if you don't do that, we're going to just ground the whole power sector into a hole, and that's not going to be good. How do we do that? I want to urge that gas, as I mentioned, has always been the conduit. And so Ghana Gas, the uptime Ghana Gas has to be consistent. At this moment in time, if Ghana Gas at any point in time falls short in their ability to supply gas, number one, or if the carrier of the gas or the conduit through this gas moves to the utility point, which is WACO at this moment, number two, if we are not able to meet these two things, it's going to be difficult.
And to some other stories, the United Nations Development Programme is embarking on an economic impact initiative with the Denmark Embassy to address the concerns of radicalization in the 5 northern regions. The initiative targeted at the youth and women will provide some job opportunities to beneficiaries and help them earn some income in order to avoid extremism and movement of terrorists. Here is more.
The Economic Impact Initiative will ensure that high unemployment rate in the 5 regions of the north are addressed in order to control the flow of terrorists into the regions. According to the United Nations Development Programme, economic challenges linked to unemployment are identified as one of the issues driving extremism and other social vices. Country representative of the UNDP, Angela Lusigi, spoke to journalists after launching the initiative in Accra.
It's not only of spillovers that are coming from across the border, but also some of the socio-economic and other risk factors that they're experiencing. Unemployment, also exposure to local conflicts, and there's a host of issues that are making these communities vulnerable. So this project is very important because it's trying to address these localized drivers of radicalization. So for instance, working with the communities to see how we can strengthen the early warning system so they understand what terrorism is and they also understand how they can respond. But also it's looking at how we can address some of the messages that the communities are getting so that they're able to understand and come up with counter messages against radicalization. And here we're working very much with the young people, but also looking at the resilience. So we understand that economic issues are some of the localized drivers of radicalization. So working with youth and women entrepreneurs to try and identify opportunities where people can secure their livelihoods and make them less vulnerable to terrorism and extremism.
Danish ambassador to Ghana, Tom Noring, justified the support his country and the European Union is giving to the initiative.
EU is very active. That most of the support, the financial support that the EU is giving in part of its 7-year plan for the first 3 years is actually directed at the north, whether it's to support agricultural programs, educational programs, infrastructure programs. Most of the EU funds are actually directed to the north for the same reason, to ensure that they're not falling behind. So things are happening. We also need to get that message across to the people in the north, to the young people especially, that there's hope at the end of the tunnel. Because right now, as we've seen, Ghana has been through a very, very difficult economic development the last year and a half. If you're from the poorest part and you're part of that and you're seeing that it's just going from bad to worse, you may find yourself almost lost. And we want to send a signal through this program, through other programs, that there is hope, there is a future, and you should not give up. You should not give up to radicalization.
This is one of the projects by the UNDP to secure livelihoods of the vulnerable.
Let's now touch on the economy proper, and the economy continues to show signs of recovery with activities in some sectors picking up. This is based on analysis of fresh data from the Bank of Ghana. Joy Biafe has the rest of the story.
There were concerns that the pickup in the first quarter of this year could be slowing down in the second half. This was based on fears that we might be hit by the aftershocks of the domestic debt exchange program. But a careful look at the numbers showed that the recovery has been sustained, but maybe at a slower pace. Port activities, which was a major challenge coming from last year, is also picking up, a development that could impact on revenue and tax collections. Another major indicator, that is the Bank of Ghana's Real Composite Index of Economic Activities, have witnessed some marginal growth. Domestic VAT collections, industrial consumption of electricity and exports are posting some interesting numbers, which will weigh on the larger economy to aid this recovery. The Ghana city has consolidated gains made from June this year and is projected to remain strong in the coming months based on the expected donor inflows. However, some have argued that sustaining this recovery will be based on how government carefully sticks to implementing the IMF program, as well as being disciplined with its expenditure. The World Bank is projecting that the Ghanaian economy should recover strongly from 2025. The bank's country director, in an interview with the BBC, has maintained that the institution itself is surprised about the pace of recovery, especially for an economy that is undergoing a debt exchange program.
All right, so let's have a discussion on this, and let's go on Zoom and speak to economist Professor Lord Benson for more on this. Professor Benson, a pleasure you could join me on Business Live. Now, did you anticipate the Monetary Policy Committee to marginally increase the policy rate from 29.5% to 30%? And really, in your view, will that help control inflation like the governor stated?
Yeah, thank you very much. Good evening to our viewers. Let me go straight to say that I'm not surprised that the policy committee increased the policy rate. But the margin that it was increased up to, I don't know, and I cannot say that it will be able to bring inflation down. We're looking at the possible expectations in price increase. Where would that be coming from? We realize that most of the revenue enhanced, programs or policies that government rolls out has a tendency of building up, price increases on the market. For instance, recently we had these energy tariffs, going up, which, has a tendency of building up in price increase. Possible tax, introductions and tax recalibrations from the media budget review that we are expecting are likely to have impact on prices. So I'm tempted to say that the margin that it was increased up, which is the 0.5, I don't think it will be able to fight the possible upscale in price pressures that most of these revenue enhanced policies come with. But then I think, the policy committee was also being careful. See, there are two things we're looking at. There's a possibility that when you increase the rate, it has a tendency of also building up into borrowing rate and other interest rate structures. So they're going slowly. But trust me, if inflation goes up, it will push, interest rates also up. So from where I sit, the margin wasn't enough to catch up with, to bring price down. Let me put it that way.
Now, businesses over the period have complained that the policy rate tool is not working and rather increasing interest rates. Now, do you hold the view that that is indeed the case?
I think I share the same view. I have always been on the view that, the policy rate in itself as a standalone is not effective. It must go hand in hand with, fiscal policy. Because you cannot, keep on catching inflation whilst fiscal policy, which has to do with government expenditure and other things, tends to push inflation up. So, i.e., the government of Ghana borrows from the central bank, for which, through the IMF program, we've been, told not to borrow from the central bank again. the point where they've scaled it to zero borrowing from the central bank. And if we continue in that direction, possibly we should be able to control inflation on the fiscal side. Government should also find a way to tame down the possible, financing from the, short-term instrument. Because financing from the short-term instrument will build up into high interest rate. What is going to happen is that you are financing your deficit with short-term instrument. And short-term instrument, the deficit has to do with possibly medium to long-term, demand. And as a result of that, you will be tempted to be financing and continuous financing. So you fall into what we call refinancing risk. And that is what government is likely to be exposed to. And this refinancing risk has a tendency of building up into inflation. So effectively, we need to look at it carefully and then say that, yes, indeed, if government wants to do control, the possible rate, they may have to tone down, the borrowing and through, reduction in deficit.
I guess expenditure rationalization come to play then.
Yes, of course. That's very, very important. So that's on the fiscal side. When government does not spend well, that is when we see more inflation, and government tends to demand more money from the central bank in that regard, and that will build up into the inflation pressures.
I don't know whether you make or what you make of the governor's assertion that it is important for us as a country, to complement our fiscal policies, that of the monetary ones. But we do know that anytime there is an election year, we see government overspend. Now, do you foresee that happening? And do we know that 2024, we are likely to see budget overruns?
Yes, we are. The reason being that, you see, the IMF program we find ourselves in does not grow down to the point where they will do possible allocations for us. And then also, if you look at the programs seem to have some soft spot for the vulnerable, the social policies. And most of the time, if government wants to hide its expenditure, it runs it through the social policies. So from where I sit, I don't think, 2024 will be anything different from the previous election years. We're going to see more spending because government will be tempted to hide behind social, policies to spend.
Even when we have the IMF on board?
Oh, yes, because the IMF on board, the program says that they're going to, make sure the vulnerable is comfortable in the program. So if leap and they try to spread money, overboard, what will you say? If it is leap, yes, they're giving money to vulnerable and then they go overboard. You don't have control because in the program, vulnerable needs to be protected. And I'm telling you that is where government has been hiding over the years to spend unnecessarily when we're getting into elections.
All right, again, let me refer you to the governor where he assured that the second round of the domestic debt exchange program will have little impact on the fortunes of banks. Do you believe so?
Yeah, it depends on the concentration of the bank's assets. I think the chunk of them were, caught up in the first, what we call it, in the first restructuring. And so if you look at typical bank's asset, the short-term instruments are not that much. And the cocoa bills, because in itself was new on the market, the banks did not expose themselves in that, direction that much.
And by 31st, we expect the second round of the program to come to a close. What are you envisaging?
Yes, of course. It has, distorted the market one way or the other. It seems like Ghanaians are getting used to it. The investor community seem to be, used to it now, unlike the first one that came as a shock. This one, the creditor, borrower engagement was quite, thorough. As a result of that, seemed to bring some understanding and level-headed. And most instruments that were in the cocoa bills were not instruments that were supposed to satisfy, cash needs of most of these, investors. So I think they should be able to bear with it.
Very well. Thank you very much.
It's the system that is failing, actually.
I see.
So if a system is failing, you don't have control.
Great. Thank you very much for your input to this very hour. Professor Lord Benson is an economist speaking to us there. Let's move to one of our headline story. And Ghana is expected to be hit with shortage of onions in the coming days due to the successful coup in Niger. Now, the country is said to be importing about 60% of its onion from Africa's Sahel region. Soldiers yesterday went on national TV in Niger announcing that they have carried a coup. This has sparked condemnation and renewed uncertainty in a volatile part of Africa beset by coups and militant extremism. What could be the likely implication of these on Ghana, especially when the country imports its onion from Niger? Joining us to discuss this sad incident is the Chief Executive Officer of the Chamber of Agribusiness Ghana, Anthony Morrison, for more on this. Anthony, pleasure you could join me on Business Live. Now, I want to know how are traders in the onion value chain reacting to this unfortunate news of coup in Niger? Unmute for me, Anthony.
Right. Can you hear me now?
Much better, yeah. So I was asking you.
Okay.
All right.
So, yes, it's rather unfortunate.
Go ahead, sir.
Yes. So, it's rather unfortunate that this coup has happened in Niger. It happened yesterday. But straight, we are looking at a global market value of over $42 billion. And Ghana imports close to about $36 to $40 million worth of onion annually. We import from Nigeria, Niger, Burkina Faso, and sometimes also take from Netherlands, South Africa, and the US, and China, but these are very small quantities. We do produce some onion in Ghana, especially in the boku. So you have the boku red onions, which are normally done in the dry season. But the fact that we import such a huge quantity from Niger gives us a worry and the concern that we may be seeing some increases in the onion prices. But we do hope also that we do have enough stock on the market that could contain the situation for at least for the next 2 weeks. We do not know if our traders would be able to go to Niger to buy onion with the current security situation. So we will have to dialogue with the national security and all the ECOWAS protocols to see how this food trade could be possible.
As you go ahead to engage the security on that matter, for your input as a chamber, you are on the grounds. What do you think ought to be done urgently to kind of protect the onion market?
Well, the onion market, if you have been following globally, is a very sensitive commodity. If you could remember, the Jasmine Revolution, especially in the Northern Africa, was kick-started by onion, the increasing prices of onion. We are very careful with this onion because as Ghanaians, we do everything with onion. Whether we are doing salad, we are doing whatever. We are frying our eggs and stuff. We still use onion, our pepper, onion, everything. What we need to do is to intensify production of onion. As you can see, I'm on the field. We've been on the field for the past 2 weeks, going around the country, identifying various irrigation suitable for various crop production, and also identifying new agricultural lands that can be brought on board to support productivity. That aside, this afternoon I joined online talking about the agricultural insurance, which we are pushing to make sure that farmers could be supported, and the insurance will also help to de-risk the agriculture sector. So we are doing quite a lot, just that there is limited allowances with regards to access to funding or financing for long-term agricultural productivity. These are some of the things we want to see in the coming budget. We want to see that government is taking steps to increase budgetary allocation for the agriculture sector. We also want to see government taking steps to implement on the inputs that are used in the agriculture purposes. So there is quite a lot. And we also have to look at our general agriculture strategy. I think it's very poor.
All right.
Not actually strategy. very well.
Rather unfortunate, we've lost Anthony Morrison there. That's it for Business Live for today. I am Pius Kojo Bakadu. Enjoy the rest of our programs. Bye.